This is a complete setup guide for the PSMove service version 8.6.3, which is now known as the PSMove SteamVR Bridge, version 1.3.3. This guide will help you to get motion controllers working with all different kinds of VR setups. It will also include how to get head tracking working with headsets that do not have positional head tracking, including Riftcat. Because there are a number of steps here, be sure to watch this right through once to ensure that you know what you're getting yourself into and what sort of things you need. Then watch it again while pausing after you complete each step. This will make sure that you don't miss any of the steps and your setup is done much quicker. Now let's take a peek at the software you're going to need. Links to all of this software is available in the description below, so you should probably download it now before getting started. So if you are looking to use the PSMove controllers, the first thing you'll need is the PSMove SteamVR Bridge software. You'll also need Steam with SteamVR installed. Then you'll need Zadig USB driver installer to get the cameras installed. If you're using Riftcat, you're going to need the following as well. You'll need Riftcat Bridge for the video streaming, FreePie and PSMove FreePie Bridge to enable head tracking, and AutoHotkey is an optional piece of software, but it really helps, so I highly recommend using it. Now moving on to the hardware side of things. You'll need 2 or 3 PSMove controllers. The third is if you don't want to make your own head tracker and would rather use the PSMove controller for head tracking. You'll need 2 to 4 PSI cameras. These are extremely cheap to buy. I've also put links to where you can get all of this hardware in the description below. You'll need a VR headset, and this can of course be an Android phone based headset, or something like an Oculus Rift DK2 or Pimax. You'll need some USB extension cables for the cameras. You'll need a USB Bluetooth adapter, or built-in Bluetooth support on your computer. This is so that you can get controllers connected to the machine. You'll need just one mini USB-B cable to initially pair the controllers. You'll need some brackets to mount the cameras, and just about anything will do as long as you can secure the cameras properly. You'll also need a small table or a raised surface so you can do the calibrations on them. And lastly, you'll need the calibration mat, which is also downloadable from the link in the description below. Here's a look at how I have my cameras set up. Ideally, you want them above head height, but probably no more than 8 or 9 feet high. These cameras have a range of about 12 feet at the most, so you just need to make sure that your controllers or head tracker will always be visible by at least 2 cameras to get reliable tracking. The shape or position of how you place the cameras isn't that important because this is something that gets worked out during the calibration process. When running your cables, keep in mind that USB 2.0 is only reliable for about 16 feet or 5 meters. This distance includes the length of the cable that's on the camera already. So if you need to run that cable any longer than 16 feet, then you'll need to use either an active cable or place a USB hub in the middle to act as a repeater. Now let's move on to the desktop to get things installed. First, open up Device Manager and check to see if Windows is detecting all of your cameras. You can see them listed here without any drivers installed. They should be listed as USB camera B4 and then so forth. So we'll open up Zadig and use the drop down list to select one of the cameras. You'll then want to choose libUSB Win32, then click Install Driver. Once you do this, it should install the driver for all of the cameras since they share the same hardware ID. However, one of my cameras does look to be a bit of a different generation, so I'll just install that same driver on that one as well. Once complete, you should see them all listed in Device Manager under libUSB Win32 devices without any error. Now we can install the Bluetooth adapter. You'll see that I don't have any Bluetooth listed here in Device Manager, but in Windows 10 there is native Bluetooth support, so all you need to do is plug your adapter into the machine and it'll install. It should show up just like this, generic Bluetooth radio. I'm going to recommend that you create a new folder on your desktop to hold all of the files we need for this setup. I'll make one called VR Files. Inside that folder, you should create another one for the PSMove service. Now open up the PSMove SteamVR Bridge zip file and copy all of the contents into your PSMove service folder. The very first thing we'll need to do in this folder is test out the cameras because nothing is possible without the cameras functioning properly. So run the testcamera.exe file. In here, the first thing you need to do is enter the camera FPS. As long as you use between 40 to 60 FPS, your tracking will be just fine. So let's start at 60. Then we'll select the frame rate, and since the cameras are 640 by 480 resolution, just punch in 640, then hit enter. This will open up all of the cameras that are properly installed. Once opened, space them out so you can see them all at once. Then we can test to make sure they're getting smooth playback. You can also click on one of the camera windows and then hit the space bar to check the current FPS. If it stays around the FPS you selected, then you're properly set up without any USB bandwidth issues. If you do see bad frame rates and it looks choppy, then reopen the test cameras and drop the FPS down to 50 and try again. Now whatever FPS you land on that works best for you, remember that number because we'll need it later. Since you have all of the cameras open right now, this will be a good time to take a walk around your play area to make sure you're getting proper coverage. You should have at least 2 cameras see you at all times, and this includes the top of your head for head tracking. Also, make sure that you can see the small table with the calibration mat taped down to it, roughly in the center of all cameras in the windows. Adjust the camera position a bit if necessary. When they are set up in the right spot, make sure they're secured because if they move at any time, you will need to redo the calibrations later on. Now that everything looks good, we can close that down and run the SteamVR initial setup batch file. You'll need to navigate to your Steam install folder from the window that pops up, then click on OK, and then that'll copy the files over. Now, just run the reinstall driver batch file. Once that's complete, run the set variables batch file as well. Now we can finally run the PSMove service. This is what we need to always have running for your controllers to work. So if anything isn't working, just make sure this is running. The only time you want this closed is when you're running the test camera file. So once that opens up, open up the config tool and connect using the default settings. To get the controller set up, click on controller settings and you'll see here that no controllers are connected. So turn one of the controllers on and the LED on the controller will blink quickly to say it's waiting to pair. Now, connect it to the computer with the mini USB cable. You might see the same thing that I'm getting saying it wants to disconnect the controller, but that's fine. Just hit it, then reconnect the controller, and then it should let you pair with it. Now just keep hitting the PS button every once in a while to keep it active while pairing. This may take a bit of time and the progress bar may jump up and down, but it will eventually connect. Once you start the pairing process, you can also unplug the cable as well. Once the controller connects, it'll throw you straight into the controller settings window and you'll see the LED on the controller will go solid. Now we can connect the second controller. Again, I had the same bug as before, but it will still work either way. Once that's complete, do it again for the third controller if you're using that for head tracking. Now just make sure each controller is showing up with their own IDs in this window. ID 0 and 1 will be your hand controllers, and if you decide to use that third controller for head tracking, it should be ID 2. Select controller 0, then click Calibrate Magnetometer. If this option is grayed out for you, this means you have the newer controller designed for the PS4. It has a newer firmware that disables the magnetometer, so you'll have to skip this step. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about this, but you can still use the controller. It just may need to be aligned with the controller hotkey every once in a while during gameplay. I suggest to zoom out a little bit in the window with the scroll wheel and then turn it off to the side just a bit like this. This way, you can see the cube grow as you calibrate the furthest extents of the controller range. Now just keep spinning the controller around like this, even beyond the point where the progress bar fills up. Just keep going until the square doesn't grow anymore. And don't be afraid to switch hands as well, you'll be able to hit different angles like that. This will ensure you have the most accurate calibration possible. Once you're satisfied with it, place the controller on the flat surface with the calibration mat on it. You'll want the trigger of the controller to face exactly forwards, and also make sure the calibration mat is facing the direction you want to be forwards as well. Keep in mind the same point should always be your forwards point. Then just click OK and let the calibration finish. I like to close the config tool in service right after it finishes since it helped to get rid of drift in the past, but it's probably not needed anymore. But it only takes just a second to do it, so I continue to do it anyways. Now reopen the service and config tool and now we'll click on Calibrate Gyroscope. Since the controller is still sitting in the middle of the room on your surface, you can just run it straight away. Just let it finish and then you'll be able to test to make sure everything's working properly. Feel free to pick the controller up now and move it around to see if it's jittery or laggy. If it is, then you may need to try moving around the Bluetooth adapter into different USB ports since it's most likely a bandwidth issue on the USB root hub. Another good test here is to lay it flat on the surface facing forwards. This will help to check and see if you have any yaw drift. If it does, you may want to try redoing the magnetometer calibration. And next time put a few more dots inside of that sphere before you finish the calibration. A tiny bit of drift right away is fine, but as long as it's not continuously moving around, you'll be alright. Now next in this list, we're going to ignore the calibrate optical noise, since that's used for the Kalman filter, which is still under development. You can experiment with the different position and orientation filters once everything is complete, but the defaults do work quite well, so just stick with them for now. At this point, you can do the same thing over again with your second controller by selecting ID 1 in your main controller settings window. Once you've done the needed calibration with all of the controllers, you should never need to do that again. So let's just jump ahead to where I have both of my controllers calibrated. The next spot we need to go into is the tracker settings. So return to your main window and then click tracker settings. This is a good time to stand all of your controllers on the flat surface in the middle of the room and space them out a little bit so they're visible by all cameras. Looking at the tracker settings, you should be able to see all of your cameras listed as different tracker IDs. If you're using a 4-camera setup like me, you'll see ID 0 through 3. We will now calibrate the trackers to focus on the colored orbs of the PSMove controllers. So make sure you select tracker 0 and controller 0. Then click on calibrate controller tracking colors. That controller should light up and you'll see the view from the selected tracker. Also, be sure the video filter is set to RGB. Now make sure you set the FPS of the camera. Changing the FPS will affect the calibration, so set it to what you found works best while testing the cameras. Now check to see that you can clearly see the bulb. If it stands out well like this, you don't need to adjust the gain or exposure. Now click on the color checkbox so the service will automatically calibrate each color on that controller. I prefer not to use the auto controller or auto tracker settings because I would rather see each one independently in case there's any issues that come up. You can now right click on the controller bulb and keep your mouse cursor over top of the orb as it cycles through each color and calibrates it. Now switch the controller you are using by clicking the arrow on the right hand side under PSMove controller ID, and just do the exact same thing with the second and third controller if you're using it. Once finished, switch over to mask mode and check to make sure that you don't see anything but the controller orb in the color that you've picked and it's completely solid like this. The bigger the orb looks, the better your tracking will be. So if you do want to adjust it a little bit more, uncheck the color checkbox and then you can right click on it again to see if it helps to fill it up a little bit more. Now we'll just switch back to RGB mode and then move to your next tracker by selecting a different tracker ID. So just make sure you do each one of your controllers on each of the cameras, then just repeat that entire process again and remember to first set the frame rate. Just the same as we did before, and then check them out in mask mode after you finish the camera. If there's anything else showing up in mask mode, you might want to consider using a different color for that controller. Since we calibrated all colors on all controllers, you should be able to switch between any of the colors at any time without needing to calibrate again. One last thing you could do before exiting this, you can click on the button to turn on all bulbs and then cycle through some of the controllers and trackers and see if any of the colors are showing up when they shouldn't. If it does, you can just select a different color and that might help fix this. Once everything looks good, click Save and Apply and we can head back to our tracker settings window. First, you'll want to lay the controllers down so we don't run the calibration too early, and then we'll click on Compute Tracker Poses using Controller. The selected controller will light up, so we'll use that one to compute the poses. This step is to get the cameras to determine their position in relation to each other and map out the room layout. Because of this only needs to be done with one of the controllers. So move the other controllers out of the way and then check each of the trackers to make sure you see the crosshairs on the selected controller of each camera. If you see it in every camera, then just click on Looks Good. Again, make sure your mat is still facing forwards and that it's taped down because we do not want it to move during this calibration. Now stand the controller up on point 1 and let the progress bar fill up. If the calibration doesn't automatically start, that's not a problem. You can click on Trust Me, it's stable. Since the trackers are only using the glowing orb to do this computation, it won't affect anything if you have to do that. Once it finishes, move to point 2 and then let it fill up again. And just repeat this process until you get through point 5. Once that's done, you'll see a quick tracking test. So just zoom out here with the scroll wheel and then turn it a bit on an angle again and you'll see the entire room with the green lines. When you see a green line, that means the camera can see the controller, and the red lines mean that the camera has lost the tracking. Before closing out the config tool, you can now select all controllers in the test tracking window, and then test tracking poses. Here, you'll be able to try out all controllers at the same time. If you're happy with how everything looks, just close the config tool and PSMove service. Now we're going to have to modify our SteamVR to get the PSMove service to work with it. Go to your Steam install folder and open up the config folder and find SteamVR.VRsettings. Make sure you have Show Known File Extensions enabled in Windows. If you don't see the file, or just want to modify the one I use, you can download one from the description below that'll include the basics to get things running. The important parts in this file to get things running are the button mappings for the PSMove controller and the Activate Multiple Drivers section here. If you're using a third controller for head tracking, I put a separate download in the SteamVR settings file that you'll need to edit. You'll need to put the MAC address found here like this in the config tool, in place of where the X's are. If you wish to edit this further and edit your own button assignments, I'll put a link to the wiki where everything is laid out in the description as well. If you don't require head tracking at all because your own headset already has it, like the DK2, you could stop here and just be sure to start the PSMove service before running SteamVR. Then everything should connect just fine. For Riftcat users, just follow the next few steps and we'll get head tracking set up. If you're using the third controller for head tracking, just follow the next steps. If you plan on using a virtual HMD, check the description below for my playlist on getting the virtual HMD set up and installed. Now before following that guide, you'll need to install FreePie and PSMove FreePie Bridge. Since we've downloaded everything at the start, just open the PSMove FreePie Bridge zip file and extract everything from there into its own folder. Then, just install FreePie by using all defaults. A good suggestion here is to copy the shortcut of FreePie into the PSMove FreePie Bridge folder. This will keep everything together so it's easy to start things up. All you need to do is start up the PSMove service, then run FreePie. Here, you will go to File, then Open, then navigate over to your PSMove service FreePie Bridge folder, and then select the example script and click Open. Then, just go to the script by either going to Script and then Run Script, or hit F5. Now, you can minimize that so it just runs in the background. Next, run the PSMove FreePie Bridge. And in here, you will hit 1 if you're using the virtual HMD, or 2 if you're using the controller for head tracking. If using the virtual HMD, you will need to use ID 0 since that's most likely the ID number for your virtual HMD. Then you should see at the bottom of the output that it picked it up like this. If you're using a controller for head tracking, then you'll press 2 to track a controller, then just tell it you want it to track one controller, then most likely it'll be ID 2 for the third controller that you want to track. Now click No for a custom color, and lastly just use the default for the axis you want to track. Since I don't use a third controller for this, it obviously failed. But once it acquires the controller, you should see that controller light up at this point. Remember, this should be the controller that you masked in your SteamVR.VRsettings file. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to reopen this with my virtual HMD active. Since with head tracking, there are extra programs to run before starting up SteamVR, I use an AutoHotkey Script to automate it all. I've also put an example of the script in the description below as well. To use this, you do need to have AutoHotkey installed on your computer. In my example script, you will want to make sure you edit the paths for the programs that need to be run, and if you're going to use the third controller instead of a virtual HMD. Once you have it all properly edited, save and close, then right click on that file and then say Compile Script. Once it finishes, right click on it again, go Properties, and then make sure you have it run as administrator under the Compatibility tab. Now let's give that script a try. First, make sure all the programs that we plan to have open are now closed. Then, just double click on that newly made script. You should get the user account control prompt come up, then the PSMove service should run, then FreePie, and the script should load into there and then start up automatically. The PSMove FreePie Bridge should also start up with all the proper values in it. Then lastly, Riftcat should load up right after everything minimizes. In Riftcat here, we do need to change one setting. The entire top portion of these settings don't need to change at all. All we need to change is the tracking source. In this drop-down, you will want to select phone orientation and free track position. This will allow your phone gyro to control the rotation, but this will send the positional data from FreePie to SteamVR to give you full head movement. Only thing left now is to get things set up in SteamVR. So connect up your phone to Riftcat and open SteamVR. You should see your cameras and controllers light up green like this in the status box. Now just click on SteamVR, then run Room Setup. Place your VR headset with the head marker attached to it and the controllers next to it on the level surface before the room setup starts. Again, make sure you have the headset facing forwards on the mat. Just to make sure, while the HMD is facing forwards, hit the Riftcat recenter hotkey while it sits there. From here, you can either set up room scale or standing room. I will outline the standing room only, but if you want to see the room scale setup, I have a link to that as well in the description below. So click standing only and make sure both controllers and HMD are found. Then click next, then calibrate center. Now at this point, you will need to measure how high that surface is off the floor and enter it into the box and then select the correct unit of measurement. Then just click calibrate floor and this will set your head height. Now that the room setup is all done, you should be ready to go. So move that level surface out of the way and strap on your headset. You can now do the start select calibration with your controllers to align them while you're facing forwards. You can see here that my calibration isn't perfect, so I'm going to touch it up a little bit afterwards. And I'll note here that there's a little bit of a bug in SteamVR at the time of filming this. The controllers won't be visible unless you have the menu up. But in all games, they will still work fine. You should only need to do this room setup once, but you will need to do the start and select hotkey each time you start up SteamVR. Once here, press the PS button on the controllers to bring up your SteamVR menu, and then use the trigger to select whatever game you want to play. Hopefully this video helped you out. If it did, make sure you leave it a thumbs up, and don't be afraid to share it with your friends. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.